pray. Father, as we come before you this morning, we thank you for your goodness and grace. We thank you for the love and mercy that you have shown us, Father, in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And we thank you that you brought us to this place, Father, because it's the place where we come. It's the place where we gather with other Christians to deliberately take time out of our life to think about you, to think about your glory, to think about your Son, Jesus Christ, and what he is doing for us. To think about a world, Father, that you so love, that you sent us to minister to. And that for a few moments, Father, you have called us to listen. Listen to what you've done. And listen to what it means to us and what we should do. And in all of this, Father, we'll be grateful to you and give you glory. For it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. Who matters? Who? We're pretty good with what? And what is really easy. If something around my house is broken, I know it's time to give it attention. If something around your house is broken, it's pretty easy to figure out. If you go into the basement and it's full of water, you know it's time to call a plumber or fix it yourself. If you're driving your car and that little annoying light comes on, says maintenance or check engine, you know, without even thinking about it very much, that you need to pay attention to it. Okay? If your things, frankly, are easy. Because when they clamor for your attention, it's pretty clear. But when people demand your attention, that becomes difficult. Because if there are people in my life that I care about, it's pretty easy to do that for them. Sometimes it's annoying, but you're able to do it for them. Okay? But now, if it's someone that you only know sort of peripherally, that becomes difficult for us because we just don't think about that. And if someone we don't know at all, then we sort of push that off and don't deal with it at all. We have to know them. We have to have some idea of what's going on in their life so that we can actually help them. But then annoying things begin to happen, like Scripture and like the Bible, because they are letting us know that something else is going on. There might be something bigger going on. And that all these people may have an importance that we don't always recognize. The story that we're reading this morning is really challenging. Because it's one of those stories that stop that. Like it's going to listen to it. It's in 4 of the Gospels. Okay? And it's a little bit different in each one, but we're looking at Mark this morning. Because it's right there in this place that Jesus is finally being able to show people why he's there. It is after the triumphal entry. It is before the crucifixion. And the crowd that surrounds him there is really various, because we know already from verses 1 and 2 that he's surrounded by Pharisees who are there to find a way to nail him to the wall. And if we expand it a little bit more, there are disciples there, the guys that have followed him and some others that have heard everything he said, and they're there to find out something else. But there's another crowd there, and that's the mob. Because just a few chapters earlier, he had gone into Jerusalem and called the triumphal entry, where all the people came down because they had heard about him. And he comes into the city and everybody's cheering. Everybody thinks this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They want to know why he's there. They have an idea. And with all these people, as with all other people, you know, they have expectations. The Pharisees and the scribes, they already know what to expect because Jesus has been nailing him into the wall for the last 3 years. And their attitude toward him is predictable. Okay? In fact, it's in the text. We're looking for a way to kill him. To take him before the council takes him before Pilate, and then he gets what he deserves. The disciples are just trying to figure out, well, what is he going to say today that's going to annoy us or embarrass us? Because after all, we got to follow this guy around. You know, you say people didn't think that about Jesus. They think that about Jesus because he's a human being. He may not be one to us, but he was one to them. They never really saw who he was after the resurrection. But then there's the crowd. The crowd that has an expectation of the miraculous act he's done, the supernatural powers that he's shown. The teaching that he had given was like no other person had ever given. And there is this thing that happens. And this is a story that I almost don't have to read it, but I will. Because there's little things happening here that are very important. While he was in Bethany at the house of Simon, who had a serious skin disease, as he was reclining at the table, this is just an ordinary meal. People just sit down. Okay? In fact, they kind of lay down to eat because chairs were extravagance that ordinary people couldn't afford. And so they're there and they're laying down, they're eating this meal, and everything's good. Until this woman shows up. And I'm pretty sure that everybody in the crowd knew who she was. In fact, it says that. Because as soon as she comes in and starts doing this, you can feel the tension in the air. And it goes something like this. Who does she think he is? Who does she think she is? And doesn't she know? The resentment, the fear, the anger. Even if they don't express it, it's kind of in the air. You've done that before. You've walked into a house where the husband and the wife are fighting. You can feel it, you can see it, you can experience it without them saying anything. They've got those kind of forced smiles on their face, and you say, how are you doing? Oh, we're good. We're fine. And you know they're not, but you're too polite to really ask the question and find out what's really going on. And you really don't want to know, if we're being honest. But they can't do that here because Jesus is present. And so they have to ask the question, they have to ask, what is he doing? But then, it's the woman and what she does. It's really an issue here. A woman came in with an alabaster jar of pure and expensive fragrant oil of nard. And she broke the jar and poured it on his head. Now, this is important because, first of all, it wasn't just anything at all. See, and we read 300 denarii and we're thinking, oh, what is that, 50 cents or something? No. A denarii is what someone earned a day as a wage. So do the math. 300 days. That's almost 1 year. I don't know what you make a year, but just do the math and you'll kind of know that's what this woman brought. So it wasn't like she went down to the corner drugstore and just picked up anything, any kind of oil at all. This was something that was really expensive. Something extravagant, something she wanted them to know about. And in the shadow of the cross, every single thing that happens has meaning. It had meaning then, it has meaning for us now. Because remember, it's not about the what, it's about the who. We know that Jesus is there. We know all these people are looking at him. And this woman walks in, and you can tell from the way it's written that everyone is looking at her saying, you really should not be here. In fact, I think up until that moment, she was probably invisible. Nobody really wanted to see her. She was not the kind of woman that people really wanted to know about. In fact, if you would just go away and hide somewhere, then everything will be okay. But what I like about the story is she doesn't. As we look at this, you kind of get two things going on, and they work like this. She was audacious. She was bold. She walks in, and frankly, she doesn't care. If you want to get irritated about this, I don't care. If you want to be annoyed at my presence, I don't care. If you want to take me out and stone me, go to it and good luck, because at this point, I don't care anymore. Been there with anything happening in your life, whether it's a medical issue or something going on with your family or your spouse or the nation you're in, at a certain point, you really just don't care. Because you need something. And you're not going to get it just anywhere at all. Because I think she had heard about Jesus. She had certainly heard about how he was relentless in his judgment of wickedness, but she had also heard that when people came to him with those problems, they got a hearing. They got someone who would bring to them not merely, but it was the cure that he brought. It was the insight that he had to be able to look into the lives of people and see what was really going on there. And so she comes in, and this is desperate. If you have a medical issue with a child or a spouse, and you don't get someone that knows what they're doing, you're not going to go home and say, well, it's no big deal. You're going to find the doctor that has the cure for that, and you don't care what it costs, and you don't care where he is. You will go find them to fix the problem. So that's what she did, knowing everything bad that can happen to her. And she walks in without saying a word. She walks over to Jesus, opens the jar, pours it on his head, and I don't know if she massaged it in or not, because at that point, it's irrelevant. Jesus knows who she is. And it's important to realize that the crowd does too. So just think about this for a moment. Because the Pharisees and the scribes, they certainly know who she is. And they're looking at Jesus and her at that moment with contempt and judgment. They're saying, well, if he really knew who she was, he wouldn't let her touch him at all. And you're thinking, well, is it? And with the disciples that were there, they said the same thing. Nobody in this story gets off with a pass. And by the way, if you're the crowd that just cheered Jesus into the town, you're not different at all, because you're thinking, well, just exactly who is she that she comes here? You're going to say, Virgil, are you kind of jerking this story up a little bit? Are you taking it in a direction you don't read the text? There's 4 stories, and they all say the same thing. This woman came, this woman irritated everybody in sight, and Jesus stops, and first of all, he rebukes everyone that's there. The way he puts this together, some were expressing indignation to one another. Why has this fragrant oil been wasted? For this oil might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they began to scold her. And then Jesus said, okay, we need to have a talk. That's always bad. But here's the story. It was the contempt for the woman. Not only that, it was contempt for Jesus. Say, well, read the story. You can feel it in the air here. If he knew who she was, he wouldn't do this. And then besides this, we could have taken this fragrant perfume and sold it for 300 denarii and given it to the poor. Read the story. They didn't really care about the poor at all. Because if they had cared about the poor, they would already have given them something to take care of them. They had pushed the poor to the same place they wanted the woman to be. Out of sight and out of mind. They wanted what they wanted. Jesus, fortunately, knows what we need. And the first thing the story needs is him to say something very, very important. First thing he says is, leave her alone. Stop bothering her. Now just stop for a moment, because you're in the crowd. You're not the woman, you're not Jesus, you're in the crowd. And so Jesus said, leave her alone. Well, you don't really want her to leave her alone, you want her to go. Well, Jesus is not going to make her leave. So I guess that's the first thing, because he's telling us something about Jesus Christ. This extravagant way this woman comes to him, and this acceptance that he gives her, because he just simply said, she has come here giving me something that you haven't thought to give me at all. She has given me something that you have absolutely ignored. She has done something for me that doesn't seem to have crossed your mind yet. Because you see, the Pharisees only viewed Jesus with contempt and hatred and bitterness. They wanted him dead. They were never going to see him. The disciples had some sort of idea about what Jesus was going to do. Now, I don't know what that is, but I can assure you it was not going to the cross. We hear that over and over again in the Gospels. They kept trying to protect him from that, and he kept moving toward it. And they couldn't put a leash on him at all because he understood why he was there. And then the mob that was there, maybe they wanted a political savior. Somebody that was going to come and beat down every wall that separated the rich from the poor and take all the money and give it to other people. Or maybe he was going to come and tell the Romans to leave. Maybe he was going to come and sweep everything away and do the right thing for everybody, certainly the right thing for me. And Jesus doesn't ignore that. He flings it down and dances on it. He said, this is not happening. Because what I'm doing to this woman and what she is doing for me are one and the same thing. She understood something about Jesus Christ, and that was that if you came to him, you were accepted. That doesn't mean that he approved of what you were doing. That just means in that moment and that place, he saw you. Have you ever been invisible to people? I don't mean have you literally been invisible. I mean somebody walks into the room and no matter what you do, you're not really there. It doesn't matter about your social status. It doesn't matter about the color of your skin or your nationality or anything else. People have a way of seeing who they want to see. And if you're not part of their perspective, you're invisible. You don't exist. You're not really there. And the most annoying thing you can do is make them pay attention to you. Get in their face and say, today, I will not be invisible. And that's what the woman does. She walks in and claims a place, literally, at the head or the feet of Jesus and says, I am here because there is something I need. And I need it so much and so badly that I will risk death, social approbation, and the fear of what they think because nothing else matters. When nothing else matters, there's not anything you won't do to get what you need. And that's what this woman needed. She saw in Jesus the one person that would accept her, the one person that would deliver her. And so she does something, and I'm not even sure she understood. She walks in with this perfume and pours it on his head. And Jesus got it. In spite of all the stuff, and you've been in those places where you have a room that's really quiet, and then something happens that nobody expects, and all of a sudden everybody's talking or screaming. You can't even hear yourself think. I don't know if Jesus raised his voice so that he could be heard over the den, or if he just waited for it all to die down. But I don't think he yelled like I do sometimes. Leave her alone. Are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and you can do what is good for them whenever you want, but you do not always have me. Now, that was something the disciples never wanted to hear because he kept telling them that. But he was also saying something else. Do you really care about the poor? Do you really care about the people that are around you that are in need? Do you really care about the person next to you right now? Because he was saying, no, you really don't. Because this moment, you don't even care about me. And you're thinking, well, how can people be around Jesus and not care about him? How can people see Jesus and not care about him? How can people be in the presence of this man, this God in the flesh, and not care about him? Because we are spectacularly equipped because of wickedness to ignore people that we really don't want to see. To ignore somebody who tells us who they really are and we really don't want to know. And what Jesus says in these few words is, I want to be clear about this. She has done, verse 8, she has done what she could. She anointed my body in advance for burial. Remember, all of this is done in the shadow of the cross. He lets everyone in that room know, I didn't come here to live. I came here to die. I didn't come here for me. I came here for you. And I did not come here for glory. I came here for burial. I didn't come here for me. I came here for you. And as far as I can tell from the story, the only person who got it was the woman. I don't know that she knew, but she knew enough to take this oil and pour it on the head of Jesus Christ. She had some idea of what it was going to mean for her. So the only question is something like this. What is it going to mean for us? Do you imagine that anybody in that house or anybody surrounding that had any doubt now about what Jesus would do? About who Jesus came for? The Gospels are filled with stories just like this. People would come to Jesus with questions and demands. Sometimes he would answer. But when people came to him with needs, when people came to him that were on the outside looking in, when they came to Jesus asking for help, they always got the help. And they didn't feel like they were an imposition to him. He had the gift of being in the middle of a crowd and somehow looking at the person that was there and seeing them and only them. It's like everybody else is just out of focus. This one person. Have you ever been like that? Where you need some attention? You need somebody to pay attention to you? And the crowds around you seem to be moving in any direction it wants to, but somebody stops. And they actually pay attention. It's a remarkable one. And that's what happened here. This woman that came to Jesus boldly and fearfully and in every other way. And Jesus said, she's the only one that really gets it. And then he says something even more remarkable. He said, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the entire world, what this woman has done will also be told in memory. This is Jesus, and he's the center of the universe. And he says, wherever my gospel is preached, people are going to remember her. Do you think anybody in that crowd ever forgot her? Not a chance in the world. The woman that came in that basically crashed the party, and she was the only one that really got it. She knew why he was there. She knew what he was doing. She knew what he had brought to her life. And from then on, I'm pretty sure she didn't talk about anything else. Like the woman at the well who goes back to the city that had rejected her and said, I need to tell you a guy that told me everything I'd ever done. I don't want somebody to tell me everything I'd ever done. But somehow, coming from Jesus, it was okay. Because she knew she was accepted. She knew she was in. We also see that in stories in the gospel, how people will come to Jesus in need. And he will pretty much say anything they need to hear. And it's okay. Because he's the one that has come to us, telling us that we're his, that we're accepted, that we're forgiven. And all these things are true. And so our life from that moment on becomes something a little bit different. Every Sunday, all of us come together, and I'm not saying this to beat you up. I'm talking to me a little bit right now. Some Sundays, as I'm sitting there, standing there, singing, worship is really easy because maybe things have gone well, whatever it is, and my mind is focused and everything else, so it's easy for me to sing, it's easy for me to pray, it's easy for me to preach. Then there's other Sundays. And you need to be honest. Some Sundays where you come and you sit down and you're kind of thinking, oh. You know that. All of us know that because sometimes it's just hard. Extravagant worship begins with me not looking at me. And it doesn't begin with me looking at y'all. It begins with me looking at him. Hearing his words, seeing his actions, seeing what he does for people, seeing what he says to people, hearing what he is involved with. That changes. That changes the people around me. I begin to see with the eyes of Jesus. And all the hostility, indignation that I sometimes experience goes away because someone has said something to me that is so meaningful and purposeful that nothing else matters. We weren't there then. Maybe Sunday. In fact, I know that some did not change their mind. They walked right out of that room, ready to keep doing what they were doing to Jesus Christ, which is arranged for his death. In fact, in John chapter 12, where it tells the similar story, right after the story, Judas walks out and goes to betray Jesus. How could you see that and go betray him? but he did. We see sometimes what we want to see. There were other people that saw what Jesus said, and something like this happened. They probably said, "What in the world was all that?" And they probably went home and said, "Well, I'm going to turn on Matlock or whatever because I'm bored." It's easy just not to think about it at all. Because if we have a kind of suspicion that if I think about this, it's going to change my life. And I'm pretty happy with my life, so you just go away. But there were some people that saw this event because it wasn't a story, it was an event to them. They probably saw this and they asked the question like this: what does this mean? Because sometimes things happen that just are annoying to us. They really won't let go. They sort of hang on to us no matter what we do. I'm a cat person. I like cats better than dogs. And when I used to have them around the house, I had carpet one. And you know how cats are if there's a strand of carpet sticking up? They walk over and they bat at it for a few minutes. And then it annoys them even more, so they begin to snag it. And by the time they're done, they pull the whole thing apart because it annoys them, because it has their attention. That's what the stories and acts of Jesus Christ do for some people. They can't leave it alone. And they keep on thinking about it. They keep on working on it. That's what some people did. So the question this morning is, what kind of person do you want to be? You want to be the person that, and we can be that person. We want to be the person that simply says, well, you know, I really don't like this. In fact, I'd really like to ignore this story. I'd really like to pretend this story is not really in the Bible, or we change it into something else that it really doesn't mean. Jesus told us exactly what it meant. So there are other people that hear it, and after they've thought about it for a while, since they think it really doesn't apply to them, they just sort of ignore it and pretend it's not there. Although I think somewhere in the back of their mind it's there, and maybe it'll come up later, but not really. Then there are other people that hear this story and they can't quite let it go. It just keeps on coming back. It becomes part of the background noise of our life. Every time Jesus acts, every time Jesus says something, we have one of those three responses. The question this morning is, which one of those people do you want to be? If you're here this morning, you're not a Christian, we're asking you to come and give your life to Jesus Christ. He's asking you to come. And then he's going to start telling you stories about what he did, about who he is. And then we're going to find ways to tell other people those stories because we want them to know. That's what Jesus is calling you to. If you're a Christian this morning, maybe he's saying something like this. There's some stories you're not paying attention to. And I want you to go back and read them again. Maybe read them again for the first time. Because there's an application there, like in this story. He needs us up here. So whoever you are, he's calling you to this kind of extravagant worship because he extravagantly gives. And that's the lesson of the story about giving. Giving to him and giving to others. As we stand and as we sing.